My name is Gabi Nakibly, and this is my colleague Jan Michalevsky. And today we would like to share with you an exciting research we have done, which we call Gyrophone. In this research, we show that an attacker can eavesdrop on a conversation using a mobile device, using a smartphone, without actually using the microphone of that smartphone. This is, but rather using a small piece of hardware found on every smartphone and tablet called a gyroscope. Okay. Our research has already been picked up by several technology blogs and magazines like Wired and Engadget. Okay, before we begin, just a quick introductions of ourselves. Yeah.
Hi. So very nice to see you all. I'm a PhD student from Stanford University. I'm at the Applied Crypto group, which also does the Applied Computer Security, led by Dan Bonnet. Got some background in signal processing, which enabled to do this work. And formerly a security team manager. So Gabi will take it on from here.
Okay, thanks, Jan. As I said, my name is Gabi. I'm a security research leader at a national lab in Israel called the National Research and Simulation Center, which is part of an aerospace and defense company called Rafael. And we provide high-end research and consulting services on all things about related to information security. And I also serve as an academic researcher and lecturer at the Technion in Israel. Okay, so let's start. Our research is all about the following very simple scenario. You and your friend are having a conversation which may or may not contain sensitive details. And in all likelihood, in a close proximity to the place you're having this conversation, there is a smartphone or a tablet, maybe lying on the desk, maybe in your pocket or in your bag. And let's say an attacker would like now to eavesdrop on your conversation. And let's say even further, he has been able to fool you and convince you somehow to install his application on your smartphone. Now, some of you may think that from this point onward, the attacker will have it easy. All the attacker needs now to do is have his application access the microphone and start recording the conversation, the microphone of that smartphone. Now, there is still a problem for the attacker. An application cannot simply, on its own, access the microphone of the smartphone. It first needs to get an explicit permission from the user. Probably, as most of you know, even before an application is installed on Android, the application, the user has to approve all the permissions for this application. Now, if the attacker would now request a permission to open the microphone, that might raise a suspicion on the user's part, and it might not want to install the application. So there's a problem for the attacker. He still wants to eavesdrop on the conversation, but he doesn't want to raise the suspicion of the user, so he doesn't want to access the microphone. Now, it turns out that there are several other sensors on a smartphone that can be freely accessed by an application without ever requesting special permission and without even the user ever knowing about it. One of those sensors is a gyroscope. A gyroscope is a little piece of hardware found on in every smartphone and tablet, which simply measures the angular velocity of the phone, how fast the phone rotates in all three axes. Now, it turns out that any application can freely access the gyroscope, again, without the user ever knowing about it. This is the case because simply it is not perceived as a security threat or a privacy threat to have a malicious application know your phone's angular velocity. What can go wrong with that? But as you will shortly see, this is not the case. Moreover, not only applications can access the gyroscope freely, every website the user visits also can freely access the phone's gyroscope using this very simple JavaScript code, again, without the user ever knowing about it. So let's talk a little about gyroscopes. So as I said, gyroscopes are a little piece of hardware, like a few millimeters of size, which is, can be found in every mobile device, and which, again, measures the angular velocity of the phone. And there are two major vendors for gyroscopes. The larger vendor is ST Microelectronics, which provides the gyros for all Samsung Galaxy line phones, and for iPhones up to 5S. And the smaller vendor is InvenSense, which provide the gyros for Google Nexus line of phones, and now for iPhone 6. Now, regardless of the vendors, all gyroscopes work the same way. They all have moving masses within them that constantly move, just the really tiny masses that just move constantly within the gyroscope. For example, in this picture, you have two masses that go up and down constantly, just move constantly within the gyroscope. Now, as the phone begins to rotate, a force is exerted on these moving masses, which is a fictitious force, which is called a Coriolis force. And the gyroscope actually measures the magnitude of this force on these moving masses, and thereby indirectly measures the angular velocity of the phone. So it turns out, and this is actually our main finding of this research, is that gyroscopes are actually sensitive to acoustic noise. They are sensitive to sound. Sound is actually just air vibrations moving through the air in different frequencies. When these air vibrations hit the gyroscope, hit these moving masses, they vibrate them. And if they vibrate them in the right direction, in the expected direction of the Coriolis force, then the gyroscope would misinterpret these vibrations as vibrations of the Coriolis force, and thereby misinterpret these vibrations as vibrations of the angular velocity. Here's a simple illustration of this. In this very simple experiment, we just placed a phone up against a speaker and played a 50 Hertz tone. During the playing of this tone, we continuously measured the gyroscope, kept sampling the gyroscope for the phone's angular velocity, and then we took all these measurements and transformed them into the frequency domain, where we just got the power of each frequency for all these measurements. So here you can see that in the low range of frequencies, the power is relatively high due to some random noise, but we get here a peak at 50 Hertz. So what happens, as I explained, the speaker just emitted sound at 50 Hertz, actually air vibrations at 50 Hertz. This air vibration hit these moving masses, which vibrated them, and then the gyroscope actually misinterpreted these vibrations as vibrations of the angular velocity at 50 Hertz, although there was no angular velocity vibration at 50 Hertz. So this was actually our first experiment we did, and we saw that indeed gyroscopes are susceptible to noise, to acoustic noise. And then we decided to estimate or evaluate a gyroscope from a standpoint of a microphone, using standard features of a microphone, and see how it measures up. So we used three standard features for a microphone, and we measured how a gyroscope evaluates and against typical values of a microphone. The first feature is the sample width, which is the length, number of bits we get for each sample. So if we sample a microphone or a gyroscope, in both cases we get 16-bit values, which is great. Now for the self-noise is just the minimum level of sound the gyroscope or the microphone can pick up. For a microphone, the typical value is 20 to 30 decibels, which is quite low. It's roughly comparable to the sound of a quiet room with all the air conditioning going on. Now, the values for a gyroscope, according to our experiment, is around 60 to 70 decibels, which is roughly comparable to a conversation or the sound of a conversation or a loud conversation. This means that a gyroscope can still pick up sound of a conversation nearby. The other feature is the sampling frequency. A sampling frequency means how many times a second we can access the microphone or the gyroscope and sample their output. A typical value for a microphone is 44.1 kilohertz, namely, 44.1 kilohertz, which can actually means that we can access the microphone 44,000 times a second and get its output. For a gyroscope, the value is actually extremely lower. It's only 200 hertz. Namely, 200 times a second, we can access the gyroscope and get its output. Now, this means that the gyroscopes are pretty lousy as microphones, but they are still can be used as microphones. Now, this 200 hertz value, it's actually not limited by the actual hardware of the gyroscopes, but it turns out it is just limited by the operating system. For example, here's the line of code for InvenSense driver, gyro, for Android operating system, which actually limits the sampling rate of a gyro to 200 hertz. The actual hardware of this gyro can have a sampling frequency of up to 8,000 hertz. Here's a table that sums up all the sampling frequencies in different platforms. So as you can see here, again, for an application on Android can have 200 hertz of sampling frequency. For iOS, it's lower, it's only 100. And for all browsers which are based on the WebKit library, it's limited even further to 20, 25 hertz. Interestingly enough, for Firefox, which is based on a different library called Gecko, the sampling frequency is not limited further beyond the OS limit, which is 200. Now, why is it so important? Why do we keep talking about this sampling frequency? Why is it so important to have a high sampling frequency? So sampling frequency is so important because it determines the range of sound frequencies the gyroscope can pick up. According to the theorem called the Nyquist theorem, using 200 hertz of sampling frequencies, we can only hear sounds of up to 100 hertz of sounds which has frequencies of up to 100 hertz, which is pretty low. It is low because the frequency of the sound frequencies of regular human speech is usually way higher than this. The fundamental frequency for an adult male speech is between 85 to 180 hertz. And of course, the secondary frequencies go way higher than this, up to 1,000 or 2,000 hertz. For an adult female, it's 165 to 255 hertz. So actually, the range between 0 to 100 hertz is quite limited. And let me illustrate for you how limited it is. This is a speech of an adult male saying the word one. It is sampled with 800 hertz. Let's hear it.
One.
Okay, we can hear it loud and clear. The man saying one. Now here's the same speech sampled using 200 hertz, which is of course way lower. You can see that all the samples are widely spaced. We have much less information here. And let's see how that sounds. That is it. Let's hear it again. Okay. No one can really understand what can even been said here. There is not enough information for a human to understand that somebody just said 1 here. And this means that we cannot reconstruct using the gyroscope the speech or the sounds in order for a human to understand it. Instead, what we need to do is actually use automatic algorithms to train automatic algorithms to recognize the speech for us. Now, there is still some good news here because we can still hear or gain some information beyond the 100 hertz limit using a phenomenon called aliasing. Now, let me explain for you just real briefly what aliasing is all about. Let's take a look at the upper picture. Here we can see a signal, a low frequency signal marked in the yellow line, and the vertical black bars there are just the time samples. It's for each time sample we get a sample marked in red. So you can see that very easily we can reconstruct using the red samples the original signal. Now, if we try to sample again using the same time samples, a much higher frequency, like in the bottom picture, and we try to reconstruct from the red samples a signal, we get a different signal, not the original one, but a different with a lower frequency, which is the black line over there. The constructed signal we get is actually an alias of the original high frequency signal. And it has a frequency which is an alias of the frequency of the higher, of the original signal. And this phenomenon we also got while we measured the sound of high frequency using a gyroscope. Here's an experiment we did. We again took a phone and placed it up against the speaker, and we played high frequency sounds. And for example, here, here we played the 120 hertz sound, and we actually got a peak at 80 hertz. 80 is the alias of 120 hertz. And when we played a tone of 130 hertz, we got a peak at 70 hertz. Again, 70 hertz is the alias of 130 hertz. So this phenomena, aliasing, can actually help us gain some information from frequencies that are higher than 100 hertz. But still, there are aliases. If we get a peak at 80 hertz, we can never tell if it is the true signal at 80 hertz or it's just an alias of 120 hertz. So now we'll switch over to Jan, and Jan will explain to you all about the experiments we did and the algorithms we used to recognize the speech. Here you go.
Thanks, Gabi. Okay, so we saw the background to it, the kind of little experiments that encouraged us to proceed with this. And from now on, we experimented and evaluated our algorithms using this simple setup, which consisted of a simple room, a simple set of speakers, not something fancy, a smartphone, which was positioned near the speakers. To evaluate our algorithms, we used the TI digits speech corpus, which is a widely used data set for speech processing and audio processing applications, kind of a standard in the community. We took it's a huge data set, so we took a small subset of it of 220 samples that contains pronunciations by 10 different speakers, 11 pronunciations of digits, why 11? Because you can pronounce 0 also as O, and 2 pronunciation by every speaker for each digit. So that's our sample set, and that's what we worked with. Now, first of all, we tried to see what can we do with what can we achieve using a single device, a single smartphone device that contains one gyroscope. It's hinting about some further work with multiple devices. And we set three main tasks. So one was gender identifications. It means distinguishing between female and male speakers. And the second one was speaker identification, so working, still identifying speakers, but working with a larger set of speakers that we are familiar with, and having an unlabeled sample trying to identify who said this, who pronounced it. And the most ambitious task is, of course, the isolated word recognition, which means for every pronunciation to identify the word that's been said. Of course, we could have been more ambitious and tried to do something like continuous speech processing, but we didn't go there because our goal wasn't to develop some state-of-the-art speech recognition algorithm, but rather to show a proof of concept. And from then, using those techniques, you can achieve perhaps some continuous speech identification. Okay, so let's proceed. So just to test the waters, just to see what's going on, what can we do, and get some sense of the kind of results we can get. We first of all tried working with an existing speech processing speech recognition engine, which is called the Sphinx. The Sphinx was developed by Carnegie Mellon University, and this was a quite mature version, a well-tested engine that we could rely on. So we tested it for the task of isolated word recognition, which this engine is suitable for. It recognizes words and speech. And we got, so having 11 different words, the random guess percentage would be around 9%. And we got 14%, consistently obtained 14% successful identification. So it's a significant advantage, but it's not an incredible result. So it's kind of encouraging on the one hand, but we need to do something better. And we attributed this kind of low result to the fact that this engine is probably geared towards real understandable human speech, whereas our signals are very limited in frequency. These are aliased signals where high frequencies fold and create noise in the recorded sample. So we had to develop our own algorithms. Okay, so the preprocessing that before we start identifying the samples and recognizing speech, we need to preprocess our data. We converted the gyroscope recordings to wave files, with which we could work. Upsampled it for simpler processing, means virtually raise the frequency of the recorded signal by putting zeros between the samples, interpolating them, and silence removal, which is the most important part of this preprocessing. So basically, we wanted to remove the regions that are not speech, not part of the pronunciation, silence that precedes or comes after the recording. This is because those silent regions are actually filled with the gyroscope noise, and we don't want this noise to interfere with the recognition algorithm. So this is a very important part, and it's based on some existing algorithms for voice and voice segment classification, which we improved a bit for our task. So this is kind of all standard things. We didn't come up with anything theoretically new here. So in order to classify samples, we need to pick up some features. Again, we went for standard things. We took the Mel-Frequency Cepstral Coefficient. Maybe someone who's familiar with the field, it might ring a bell. So these features are frequently used for speech and audio processing, and basically tell us how much energy is concentrated in different frequency band. we took the statistical features for those coefficients, meaning different statistical moments like mean and variance, in order to summarize this information. For maybe somebody who may note that these features are makes more sense for real human speech and not necessarily for these low frequency aliased signals. So we took it for more practical, for a pragmatic reason of working with something standard for which we have well-tested algorithms, and not specifically because it's better theoretically to pick those specific features, but they're still good to work with. And we took also the delta MFCC, which is the derivative of those coefficients. So the derivative tells us something about the development of those features in time, as more information. Spectral centroid, which indicates where is most of the energy of the signal located, in which frequency band. Root mean square energy. And another one, which is quite interesting, is the short time Fourier transform. It's basically a spectrogram, the whole spectrogram of the signal. And that contains a lot of information about the temporal development of the signal. So that would be particularly, we expected that it would be particularly good for the isolated word recognition, when not only the frequencies and the pitch and the timbre matter, but the development in time. Okay, so these are the features. And let's talk about the classifiers. So classifiers are algorithms that label samples, that take a sample and tell us which group does this sample belong to. Okay, so for example, for gender identification, a classifier would classify it as a male speech or female speech. And we use the following. Again, standard classifiers, not something new. So I guess the most known will be SVM, support vector machine, a binary SVM and multi-class SVM, which we constructed from the binary SVMs. Gaussian mixture model, it's kind of a state-of-the-art especially for speaker identification. And something that's a bit less standard is the dynamic time warping. So the dynamic time warping, so while the first two, they're particularly good for aggregating spectral features and are expected to do well for stuff like gender identification, speaker identification, when we don't care about the particular word, but rather about the aggregated spectral information. The dynamic time warping, it's good for understanding how the feature develops in time. So we basically want to take a word that some pronunciation which we don't know what it is, and classify it to be able to say that it's a 1 or 2, basically say that it's similar to another word in our data set that we previously obtained. So because we can pronounce words in different ways, I can say 0 quickly, or I can say 0, smearing the word, and the pronunciations can be different. We need some way to compare time series, to compare sequences which can be different in length, where different parts can be kind of skewed in time, smeared, prolonged. So for that, the Euclidean distance, which is shown on the left, wouldn't be particularly good. And we need a more optimal way of aligning the sequences and finding some optimal matching between the different samples. So that's exactly what dynamic time warping does. It finds the optimal matching between two time series in such a way that it minimizes the distance between them. Okay, so let's see what we managed to obtain, what kind of results we got. So the first task, again, was gender identification, classifying a sample as a female or male speech. And for that, we used the binary SVM because we have two different groups with the spectral features, and also dynamic time warping with the STFT, with the short time Fourier transform features. So the best results were obtained for Nexus 4. And we don't show all the evaluations here, but we show the best result, which was 84% using dynamic time warping. and whereas the random guess probability would be 50% because you have two different possibilities. So I hope you understand that's kind of impressive, and with a pretty high accuracy you can tell whether the speaker is a female or a male, obtaining some information that might be considered private. So basically, we can successfully identify gender using this technique. Let's look at the second task, speaker identification. So we've got a set of a mixed set of 10 speakers, female and male. And we can also take part of this set, working with only the female speakers or the male speakers. And we're trying to take a sample and to be able to tell who exactly the speaker is. So this is kind of sensitive. And we use the multi-class SVM and GMM with spectral features, and also, again, the dynamic time warping as we previously did. So the best results here, let's first look at the random guess probability. So for a single gender set, it would be, there are 5 different speakers, so the random guess would be 20%. For the mixed set, it would be 10%. There are 10 different speakers. And the results we obtained were 50%, 45 for female, and 65 for male, using dynamic time warping. And that's for the Nexus 4. So these are the best results we've got. We can see that for the male speakers, it works somewhat better, perhaps because the frequencies are a bit lower, and the lower frequencies are sensed better by the gyroscope. So that's some speculation about this kind of result. Okay. So we have a good chance of identifying the speaker, a significant advantage over guessing. For the isolated word recognition, the most interesting task, we obtain those results. So there are 11 different pronunciations. We have a random guess probability of 9%. And the best result we have obtained was for female speakers. So that was 26% successful identification using dynamic time warping. And by the way, this is speaker independent. It means we have different speakers in the set, which makes the task kind of harder because you and I can pronounce the same word in different ways, and it makes it harder to recognize it. So while the results are not incredible, these are not very high percentages, it still reveals a lot of information, and if you convey sensitive information such as some PIN code or credit card number over a conversation, this advantage in identification over the random guess is very significant, very important, because the lengths of those things are usually the suggested length would be something that's estimated according to how long will it take to guess or run over this number. So having such a significant advantage is a pretty big deal. If we look at the confusion matrix, we can see that a lot of the digits are confused with the digits 6 and 9. So 6 and 9 would be mostly identified correctly, but other digits are a lot of time confused with them. So we have a lot of falses there, and that kind of explains the not very high percentage we obtain here. But for some digits, we'll have a pretty successful recognition. Let's look at a somewhat simpler case, and actually it's really relevant to the smartphone case, because usually you'll have 1 or 2 people using the smartphone, so not a very large set of speakers. So if you're able to train and adapt your algorithm for a particular speaker, that's pretty good. And it makes the task much more easier, because the same speaker would pronounce the words in similar ways every time, and it makes the recognition task easier. So the best results we got were using support vector machine. The GMM didn't perform well at all, probably due to a lot of confusion. And dynamic time warping obtained a pretty impressive result of 65% successful identification. Versus the random guess probability, which is 9%. And we can see at the confusion matrix that there is very little confusion. Most of the words are identified correctly and not misinterpreted. So I think that's kind of the most important result we obtained. Okay, let's proceed and let's look into how can we make some, how can we obtain some advantage by using simultaneously two devices or more. So again, people are speaking in the vicinity of the smartphone devices, and we have not one, but two gyroscopes to work with. Okay, so every gyroscope samples, senses the same conversation, but they're not synchronized. They're in different devices. They don't sample in the same time. So perhaps by somehow combining those samples, taking advantage of having two devices, we can virtually increase the sampling rate we have, and perhaps having a high sampling rate, we can increase the performance. Again, if you think about the Nyquist frequency, we can virtually obtain Nyquist frequency of 400 versus the 200 with a single device. Perhaps we'll get to look into 200 and even more with aliasing. So this setting is kind of similar to the setting of time-interleaved analog data converters. So one thing that is commonly done in sampling is having some high-frequency signal, and instead of having a high-frequency sampler, which is kind of harder to fabricate, we have multiple low-frequency devices that sample the signal, and by combining the different samples, they don't sample at the same time. So by combining them, we can obtain a higher frequency sampling of the signal. And there are different problems that you have to deal with. The most important is the time skew. So while it's good that they don't sample at the same time, we actually want them to sample on some uniform grid, like one in certain periods, one after the other. There is a problem with the time skew that you sometimes don't exactly know what is the time offset between them. You know, but not precisely, and you have to compensate for that. So that's a serious problem that this field has to deal with, and we have to deal with it too. So this is kind of an obstacle. So what we initially tried to do here is a non-uniform reconstruction of the signal. Because we don't sample, the gyroscopes are not synchronized. They don't sample at a specific time that we tell them to sample. We cannot sample on a uniform grid. Why can't we synchronize them actually? So we look into synchronizing with GPS time, or perhaps maybe sending some synchronization message between two devices. And all of this doesn't seem to work because of the delays introduced by the operating system. So while you're trying to synchronize with the GPS time, which is very precise, you have some delay until the time is updated, and those small delays are big enough to make this technique problematic. So we need something that is below 5 milliseconds precision here. Yes?
Why can't you look at the two sequences that you sample and just shift one of them with respect to the other until you get the lowest cross correlation?
Of course. So of course we did it. That would be the course, the kind of the initial synchronization, but that gives you only a resolution of on a scale of a sample. And you need a subsample resolution because you ideally would want them to sample to take the values which are half past the sample, like half of the period of a single device.
So that's what my suggested method will achieve.
So the correlation.
So there is a period of testing, and then a period in which you found the shift of the two samplings, which works best.
So you can try to you cannot do it just with correlation because that would give you a sample resolution with single device. You can try to run over different possibilities, but that's kind of hard because you need to scan quite a big range. But that's possible. I'm not saying it's not possible. We couldn't achieve that in a reasonable time. Especially when you increase the number of devices, this technique won't be scalable. But we looked into that. We didn't implement it because of the performance considerations. And also, it's kind of hard to automatically test. For example, we sing with two devices. You're not able to just hear, and after reconstructing the signal, being able with 400 Hz to understand, to tell that's the right signal. Maybe you would be able to do it with many devices where you can actually hear the speech, but that's really costly. So it's hard to automatically find this point when the time skew is right. But yeah, we looked into that. So while this non-uniform sampling seemed to work in theory and in simulation we did with downsample signal, and especially hoping that the technique you suggested might work. So practically, it didn't achieve the results we got due to not knowing this exact time skew, which is crucial to that. So we had to set for a practical compromise. So we just picked the expected value, which gets us back to just assuming a uniform sampling grid, assuming that one sample just comes after the other in equal time shifts. So what we did is it's basically interleaving the samples. So we take one sample from one gyroscope, another sample from the second gyroscope, again one sample from the first gyroscope, another sample from the other, and obtain an interleaved signals. So surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, we have more information indeed in this feature vector, and we managed to obtain better results, significantly better. So whereas with the single device for speaker-dependent identification, we obtained 65% recognition, we managed to obtain 77% successful identification with two devices. So we have an improvement over the single device case. And we hypothesized that by using more devices, we can increase the performance even more. That's yet to be tested. And we have to, the important thing to understand here is that it's not a proper non-uniform recognition scheme. So whoever will be able to come up with knowing the precise time skews or some technique to do a proper non-uniform reconstruction, and that would be great. And perhaps you would be, even with many devices, be able to hear actual speech. Okay, let's talk a little bit about further attacks. So one thing we propose is employing source separation. So the gyroscope, as we mentioned, has actually 3 axes. So actually you can sense using 3 different axes which are synchronized, and every axis would be more or less sensitive according to the direction from which the signal arrives. So we can make use of this fact, for example, to learn the number of sound sources around the mobile device, and perhaps use this knowledge of the number of sound sources and knowing which direction it comes from to perform better speech identification. For example, if I'm able to tell that now this speaker is talking, and I train my algorithm to one algorithm to work better for this speaker and another classifier to work better for another, I can use the source separation and identification of the different speakers that have this conversation to improve the results. Another thing that is not directly, particularly related to speech recognition, but rather to general sound processing would be ambient sound recognition. So the problem here is basically telling in which environment the mobile device is present now, whether it is some room, some outdoor setting, or maybe some loud street, which can convey some private information through this channel. Okay, let's finish with proposing some defenses against this technique. And first of all, let's talk about the software, the possible software defenses. We suggest, first thing we suggest is to do low-pass filtering of the raw samples we obtained from the gyro. As we've seen with according to the WebKit experience, it seems that most of the applications can do with up to 20 Hertz range. So this is much lower. It probably wouldn't enable us to perform this kind of attack. And this kind of filtering and this kind of limitation of the sampling rate should actually be done, if you're just doing software, it should actually be done by the operating system, by the driver that shouldn't supply such a high rate. And if a specific application needs, for some reason, a higher frequency access to the gyroscope, this should be a specific permission that is noticed by the user and that the user consents to. So specifically explicitly telling the user that we now need a higher sampling rate and approving this kind of access. The hardware defenses would be also similar, so having some hardware implementation in hardware of the filtering of the higher frequencies, which would clean up this information from the signal, and this probably shouldn't be subject to configuration because otherwise you would hack into the software and change the sampling rate, as you can kind of do now. You can by hacking this driver, you can increase the sampling rate. And the final one is applying some sort of acoustic masking, but we have to notice with acoustic masking that it wouldn't prevent picking up vibrations of the surface that the phone is lying on. If the phone is lying on some wooden surface which reacts well to sound, and the gyro would still pick up those vibrations probably, so that might not prevent that. The conclusion is that the main message is that there are many sensors nowadays in mobile devices that provide interesting information. And they can be exploited in various unexpected ways which weren't foreseen at design time. And in general, giving applications direct access to those sensors would be dangerous. So this is our main message, and with that we shall conclude and take questions. Thank you.
We'll be happy to take any questions you might have. Yes. We didn't hear it. Yeah.
Do you have any demonstration?
Demonstration. Actually, our code is available on the website.
Our code is available, and a live demonstration in this case wouldn't be. It would be kind of hard to do, and it wouldn't be so impressive because you saw that it's not a recognition percentages of like 90% and above of like real speech engines. So, well, we might have come up with something. It wouldn't be like some impressive demo, but it's still significant advantages. So for that reason, we didn't do a live demo.
No, actually, you know, we set out to make a point that gyroscopes can be used to eavesdrop. I think we can, an expert in signal processing and an expert in speech recognition would probably do a lot better than what we did, because we are only security experts, not speech recognition experts. But we'll leave it to the speech recognition experts. I think we made the point here that indeed this can be done. It can be improved, but we'll leave it to others.
I would like to add to that there's a lot more work to be done in terms of characterizing the gyroscopes better as microphones. And whereas our experiments were done in quite favorable settings to prove the point, it would be nice to understand what are the limitations of the attack, what range is, to what range it's limited, to what volume and sound strength, so stuff like that.
Okay, so thank you very much.